We already discussed the idea behind this acronym, the GMBM complex: the gut, the microbiome, the brain, and the mitochondria. Now we're talking about the microbiome. We talked for an hour about the gut,
Yes.
and that really formed the foundation of understanding that we're going to need to understand the microbiome, the brain, and the mitochondria. So let's talk about the microbiome. Um, we want to talk about practical aspects here. What can we do in real life, practically, to improve the health of our microbiome? And I got number one on the list here is to consume live probiotic fermented foods.
Yes.
And this is as opposed to consuming dead supplements,
Yes.
right? So,
Yes.
Explain your thoughts or your views on that, Jason.
I just want to quickly say that, taking care of the microbiome specifically is a balance of what you feed it in terms of the microbes, such as fermented foods, which we're about to talk about, and our lifestyle factors that affect the degradation of our microbiome, such as cortisol, toxic food, and environment.
So on the one hand, you have things that are helping them grow, and on the other hand, you have things that are killing them.
Yes,
and you're
we're
doing a bit of both.
We're trying to create a balance between the two, right?
And and the list will reflect that.
And the list will reflect that. So fermented foods, we want live fermented foods as a food source for the microbes of our gut. We have to consider that our microbiome are these live bacteria that feed off of live foods. And if we're feeding it dead supplements, as you put it to a certain degree, it's an ineffective way to take care of our gut, right? We have to understand that we evolved 35,000 years eating foods and not having supplements, yet we're here today. So why has our ideology changed from food into supplementation?
Going back to that argument we had earlier about, or that perspective we had about ancestral eating, ancestral dieting, what did our ancestors do? They did not have refrigerators, they did not have freezers, they did not have stores and boxed foods and supplements and all this stuff. In order to preserve food for the winter season, in order to have something to eat, they would ferment foods. They'd even ferment meats. They'd even
salt, smoke, all that kind of stuff.
There were all kinds of natural preservation methods, and whether they knew it or not, unbeknownst to them, these fermentation processes would actually provide massive health benefits, because what you would have is you'd have in a jar, let's say sauerkraut. We made that yesterday. We made sauerkraut yesterday, which is fermented cabbage, and very simply, to ferment cabbage and put it in a jar is a way to preserve it over time. And what you do is you mash it up, you stuff it in that jar, put a little bit of salt, a little bit of water. And bacteria is going to grow in that jar, in that package of sauerkraut. You have to make sure that there's an absence of oxygen as you're doing it, otherwise it'll oxidize, it'll rot.
It'll go bad.
So you want the bacteria to grow, and you want these bacteria that are growing in there to be the type of bacteria that do not require much oxygen at all to...
considering your GI tract is an oxygen-free environment,
deprived,
to a certain degree, we want to have those cultures to feed our microbes.
Exactly. So you create this environment for these microbes to proliferate, and then you eat the cabbage. The cabbage has not rotted; it hasn't been oxidized. You consume it, and you have just an injection of all these living bacteria that came from the cabbage, came from the soil that the cabbage grew in.
Healthy bacteria being probiotics, as we know them.
Your body takes that in. And it finds a little place to live in your gut, and they do their job. And what their job is to digest the types of fibers that are similar to those found in the cabbage. They can do a whole host of things. They produce certain vitamins and minerals, so on and so forth. So the advantage of having live fermented foods instead of a supplement is that they're actually alive,
living, energetic source.
Yeah, and they actually make it through your stomach, which is highly acidic. They don't die on the way there. You're just using the traditional means of populating your gut with healthy microbiota. And this is superior to using supplements, because many of the supplements, there's not real strong oversight in terms of what you're actually purchasing. In my personal opinion, it really is just an opinion, fermented foods that are living will produce gas. If you have a pill and it's not producing gas, then it's not living. It's dead, in my opinion. There might be some science that I don't truly understand.
I agree with that standpoint. Coming from, being a bodybuilder in the supplement world, there are certain supplements and probiotics out there that I like versus not like. When it comes to the probiotic argument, there are a lot of probiotics that are actually dairy based. Which create a lot of issues for people. When you're looking at the label specifically, most bacterial strains have different codes beside them, so different strain numbers. So lactobacillus, for example, has like X amount of strains.
Let me tell you something about that, though.
Yeah.
I read recently, and this is from that book I was telling you about, if there's a code next to it, it's because it's a GMO strain.
Exactly.
Okay,
exactly.
Great. Sorry.
So not only is it a GMO strain that your body doesn't quite understand, but most of the research on probiotics were only done on certain strains. So now if you buy a product that has a code number and it's a GMO strain, or you have a probiotic that has no code, now you have no research done on that potential bacterial strain that they use, and you don't actually know what you're consuming or the possible benefits of it.
Yeah.
Making it a whole complex conversation to the fact of fermented foods is always the way to go because it's real and live.
Yeah. Stick with nature first and foremost. Try to avoid any kind of frankenfoods that have been created in the lab.
I agree with that.
What did I want to add to that? Oh, well, we'll just move on then.
So what foods should people be having?
Oh, actually, what I wanted to say was that, a healthy human microbiome should have about 20 to 30,000 different species of microbes in it. Right now, the average person has about 5,000. Maybe if they're healthy, 10,000.
Furthering to that conversation, there was a study done on a certain bacterial species in babies that help digest breast milk. And out of X amount of babies that they studied, that specific bacterial strain was actually not around
anymore.
In civilized areas such as North America compared to more indigenous populations that live in the forest and woods who actually had these bacterial strains. And of course, these people who live in the woods have very low health issues compared to us in our, clean environments, civilized environments. Yeah. So it's always an interesting conversation to see how we lose our bacterial diversity and we have this increase in chronic disease. And I mean, this goes as far as cravings. Like, I'm a big believer that you crave foods based on the bacteria cultures of your gut. And if you're craving salts and sugars and sweets, you have a huge, bacterial diversity issue that are going to cause problems.
Yeah. I wouldn't say so much salts, but sweets for sure. I mean, salt is good.
Salt is good. The question of what type of salt
are
having is often not right.
Yeah. All right. So, so number one piece of advice, consume live probiotics from fermented foods. Forgo the supplements. Learn how to make sauerkraut. It's easy. Learn how to make...
learn how to cook. I think that's the biggest problem.
This isn't even cooking. This is chopping vegetables, stuffing it in a jar, adding salt.
It's just taking...
Anyone can do it.
It's just taking the time, Yeah. And again, going back to what we talked about, this idea of hustle and getting work done and being productive, overweighs this idea of actually being productive in the area of taking care of our health, and that over the long term can cause us issues to actually not be able to do anything in terms of this hustle mentality, which creates problems.
Yeah, exactly. If your health fails,
you're not doing anything.
If you're living in the short term and you let your health degrade as you're doing that, well then there is no more hustle, I guess you could say.
Yeah, exactly.
Number two, consume prebiotics from raw plant material. So probiotics versus prebiotic. A probiotic is the culture itself. It is the microbe itself, or the collection of microbes, while a prebiotic is what the microbe consumes, eats.
Yes.
And prebiotics, there are a few of them. I know off the top of my head. Inulin is one.
Yep.
Fructooligosaccharides, arabinogalactans. I have a great memory.
Apparently.
Yeah.
Of medical terms.
Some of my favorite sources for these particular prebiotics are dandelion greens.
Yep.
I'm talking about things that I've consumed myself. I have a whole list here, but I'm only going to say what I think is more common. Dandelion greens, Jerusalem artichoke, garlic and onions. Okay. Yep. Asparagus, cacao or cocoa, however you pronounce it. Flax seeds, seaweed. Seaweed is probably
the most powerful, micronutrient dense plant on the planet.
Why?
Just speaking out of experience when it comes to micronutrient density in something you're consuming, plus a lot of the minerals that are in it for thyroid health.
The mineral profile is like that of the ocean.
Exactly.
And the mineral profile of your blood is like that of the ocean.
I mean, exactly. So if and I think that's a lot of reasons why people have health issues to begin with, is we just consume not only vitamin foods that are low in vitamin content, but also foods that are low in minerals. And that goes back to soil quality and why we have this conversation of local organic foods versus conventional.
Yeah, and so now the key point here is consuming these probiotics from raw plant material.
Yes.
Emphasis on raw plant material. Not cooked.
Yes.
Okay.
Because when you're cooking it, you denature it.
You denature it. That's one. Number two is if there are microbes on it, which would actually be a prebiotic, you're getting rid of that too. Yeah. Give your body some work to do. Raw will always be more nutrient dense. Of course, source your foods correctly, organically, and make sure you're not consuming something that is GMO or full of pesticides or whatnot.
I do, I do want to, in terms of like TCM, traditional Chinese medicine, when people do have digestive issues, they talk about not having cold foods and warming their foods, such as cooking them, which is kind of the opposite of what we talked about. So this goes back to the conversation of, if you have high stress, you got a crazy lifestyle, you're not sleeping enough, you're not taking care of your health, your acidity of the gut goes down, and your ability to break down colder foods creates some issues. So this is where we have this balance of lifestyle and environment with what we're consuming to feed our microbes.
Yeah, the more stressed you are, the less capable you are of digesting and absorbing food that is raw.
Yeah.
And so the more stressed you are, the more you cook the food or prepare it in such a way that makes that process easier. Yep. This is why it's a mix. It's a mix of cooked, it's a mix of raw. It all depends on the situation. Don't think of it in black and white. So that's 1 and 2. Prebiotics, probiotics. Yep. 3 and 4 are prebiotic supplements, probiotic supplements, okay? I am not for taking supplements if you're not doing 1 and 2, but they have their use. So, a prebiotic supplement is basically a supplement form of
those different carbohydrate sugars, basically.
Inulin, arabinogalactan, whatever.
Yep. Undigestible fiber, as they call it.
Indigestible fiber. It's not digested by mammalian cells. It's digested by the microbial.
Bacterial cells, which is why we talk about, eating, I would say, anywhere between 6 to 9 cups of vegetables in a day because of the effect it has on the microbiome feeding your good bacteria. And if you're not feeding good bacteria, then they die. Yeah.
I feel like that's impractical. I don't know how many people even historically consume that many vegetables.
I would agree with that.
Unless you have a disease, that's it's huge.
Let's remember my, clientele are of disease state. So
yeah. Well, exactly. If everything's got to go a step further if you have a disease state going on. Yeah. Avoid using, this one's a big one, antibiotics in non-life-threatening situations.
Yes.
An antibiotic is basically a compound that kills living things. Antibiotic.
I like the analogy. In one of my health coaching courses, they talked about your microbiome is this lush rainforest, and antibiotic basically cuts down the rainforest, and you're left with stumps
indiscriminately.
Yeah, it doesn't matter whether it's good or bad; it kills everything, and it could take up to 2 years to actually rebuild your microbiome after a trial of antibiotic use.
Yeah, I haven't taken antibiotics for years because I do have a history of that. If you destroy your gut bacteria, some of it may not ever come back.
Yep.
And taking in antibiotics nowadays, in the medical world, they're gonna give you antibiotics for an ear infection when you're a kid.
Yep.
You have a sore throat, take some antibiotics. Oh, you have a scrape here, take some antibiotics. Okay. And you're just hacking away at the genetic infrastructure that allows you to be resilient to life in general, resilient to changes in stressors, resilient to the foods you eat or what kind of diet you could survive on, resilient to how your body grows, making sure that mutations don't occur prematurely. That resiliency resides in your gut, in the microbiota of your gut. And if you're taking antibiotics because you have an ear infection, because you're not willing to tough it out a bit or just get some sleep and allow your immune system to handle it, well, in the short term, you're getting relief. In the long term, you're getting sicker.
I just think there's a complete lack of natural health remedies for bacterial infections that cause earaches and throat infections and things like that, such as onion, garlic, thieves essential oil is great, oil of oregano. There's
a lack of knowledge about this.
Yeah. There's a lack of knowledge.
They're out there though.
There's a lack of translation from our elders that we used to look up to for this information to nowadays where most of our elders are medicated in homes and they can't even communicate effectively with us to actually translate this information to us.
Yeah, we're several generations removed from the oral tradition of home remedies and and nurturing the household and all these things that were once passed on.
Not only that, you know, when you look at homeopathy and other, you know, more natural health practices, it's out there, but it's almost disregarded as not real science due to this like allopathic world that we live in.
Yeah, because that's not good for sales, right?
And that's a whole different topic.
Yes, that's political. Let's not be political. Yeah. 6, alcohol consumption.
Yeah.
Look, alcohol's a toxin.
Yes. I believe one of the worst toxins there possibly are.
And what is legal. And what is alcohol made of? It's made out of fermented wheat products. Not all of them, right? I mean, I'm not an expert on drinking here, but so not only are you consuming wheat, right? Not only are you getting that nice dose of gluten byproducts and
yeast if you're drinking beer.
Yeast, exactly. You're getting yeast and carbohydrates. You're getting yeast, right? So you're getting overload. You're dehydrating the body. You're toxifying the body. Yeah. Usually this is done in a drinking situation is done at night. So you're getting that sleep deprivation that goes with it. Exposure to cold temperatures.
From just like a toxin standpoint, like your body's trying to filter alcohol out of your system for what, 2 to 3 days? Post drinking,
you're taxing your liver.
So if you're exactly. So if you're drinking on a say Thursday, Friday, Saturday, like so many people do, or like Friday, Saturday, even Sunday day drinking during the summer cottage season. Now it's like Wednesday before your body's even focused on rebuilding itself, burning fat, building muscle, doing anything like that because it's so focused on detox.
The impact lasts longer than one day. It lasts several days, and the longer you do this for
on a physiological basis.
Yeah, I mean the impact of an inflammatory cascade could be as far-touching or far-reaching as 11 days after the original.
It's like food intolerances. Same process.
Like I could consume something today. And 11 days later, I'm going to feel the symptom. But because 11 days have elapsed, I cannot connect that. There's no cause and effect in my mind because there's been it's like a domino effect, but a really long, slow one, depending on how everything is
going. It depends how efficient your body runs too, right?
It depends. Yeah, it's way too complicated to even try to unravel, but exactly. Non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, NSAIDs. Drugs. Things like... aspirin. That's not a trademark name, is it? Aspirin?
I have no idea.
Well, anyway, I'm not naming any companies here.
Not my world.
You know. Anyway, go on.
NSAIDs, the amount of damage. I mean, I think is Aleve banned in Canada?
I have no idea, and I wouldn't
even know. I think it's Aleve. There was one NSAID that was actually banned. Due to the detrimental effects it has on health, more specifically the microbiome and gut health, and the destruction it does to these bacterial populations.
So NSAIDs in general, okay, I know one thing about them, one very important thing. It has been found recently through using endoscopes that have been able to reach all the way into the small intestine that use of NSAIDs over a prolonged period of time causes intestinal webbing. So you have your tube, you have your gut, you have your small intestine.
Like scar tissue.
I didn't read what the webbing was really composed of, but it's a web of... Tissue. I don't know what it is.
Probably fascial tissues.
Who knows, okay? But you get this web. And so now you can imagine that things are supposed to pass through your small intestine and it's blocked. And then you have, I have clients of mine, women, and men that, don't go to the bathroom, don't have a bowel movement for 3, 4, 5, 6 days. Yeah. And, one of the simplest ways to get someone to lose weight and become healthier is to just clear the colon, clear these tubes. Yeah. Taking NSAIDs for a long period of time to solve your issues with headaches or pain or whatever it may be.
I mean, we have to understand that NSAIDs are just covering up, so to speak, like throwing the symptom under the rug and not dealing with it or avoiding it. You're avoiding it, right? You're not actually dealing with it, figuring it out.
Yeah. Which is why it's so popular.
Exactly. Doctors are great. Doctors are great, but their job is to help you maintain your lifestyle, help you do what you want to do and keep you running, right? Keep you out of that disease or dying state. And that only works short term. That doesn't work long term. And so when you're sweeping these symptoms under the rug for 1 year, 5 years, a decade, then we start to see more complex health issues come up. And that's when we start to see this like cascade effect of one disease on top of another disease on top of another disease.
I think a good way of putting it is if you have pain and you take one of these NSAIDs to mask the pain, that's all you're doing is you're masking the pain. The pain is not gone. You just don't perceive it anymore. But the thing that caused the pain, the damage that's there, that the thing that your body is responding
continuing to happen.
It's still there. Yes. You just are numb to it.
So then what happens? Well, the body creates another pain signal.
Well, what really happens is you've blocked a pathway that was meant to be a message to you to say, hey, stop doing this or change what you're doing, do this instead, right? And you've blocked that. And so you're not hearing that message, which is basically designed to encourage you to change some aspect of your behavior. Because you're not doing that, now these molecules, these signaling molecules that were originally hitting those receptors and giving you this pain signal, now they're just floating around doing other things, right? And, you know, that can manifest in so many ways. We do know that the more you use these pharmaceutical agents, the more you use these drugs, the more you're kind of pushing aside the real issue, the real root cause, and you're just covering up or masking the symptom. And yes, symptoms are uncomfortable, but they are messages of what's really going on.
People are trying to hustle.
Yeah, they're trying to. Yeah, I mean, this is the philosophy of Western living. So, yes. I mean, all in all, NSAIDs, they do two things. They create intestinal webbing in your small intestines, and they mask the root of the problem. So they kind of keep you, what's the word? They keep you irresponsible, I guess you could say. That's not the word I'm looking for, but...
They almost keep you in a holding pattern where you're not getting any better, but you actually are creating the potential to get much worse because you're not dealing with it.
Let's talk about pollutants in the environment and your microbiome. Yeah. So, you know, breathing in toxic fumes.
Yes.
You know, car exhaust. Pollutants in the air inside your home. Mm-hmm. There's pollutants in water. Yeah. I mean, there's pollutants everywhere.
I mean, in umbilical cords, they're finding up to 60 heavy metals in the umbilical cord before a baby's even born. Yeah. So this baby's already, this newborn baby, which we thought was a completely protected environment, is actually, you know, having up to 60 heavy metals, chemicals, toxins in the umbilical cord before it's even born as a result of mom's health and mom's environment.
Another one, artificial flavors and coloring. This is something that people don't truly appreciate, but artificial flavors are,
chemical.
They're chemical, yeah, and they move around in your body and they create interactions. Not, you know, how many of them do we fully understand? I mean, I'm sure there's plenty of research about the mechanisms.
There's research on like xylitol and Splenda actually showing that it wipes out bacterial populations.
Yeah.
I haven't read completely into it, but that's what I've seen.
Yeah, so we know that a lot of artificial flavors actually kill the microbiota in your gut, certain populations. And I also know that if you have that signal of sweetness on your palate, your body will produce insulin as a result.
Exactly.
Right? There's a feedback loop there.
Exactly. And that's why this game of, you know, sweeteners and no calorie sweeteners.
Yeah, no calories.
It doesn't make any sense. I'm like, if you want something sweet, eat the sugar and gain the fat and actually learn the lesson instead of, you know, creating an insulin problem now because you're having sweetness all the time, but not actually...
So let me explain a bit how having an artificial sweetener will mess you up in other ways. So, you know, the underlying rationality is, oh, I'm having this sweetener. It's low in calories, okay? I'm not going to go into why this idea of calories, first and foremost, is kind of silly. The human body isn't a Bunsen burner, okay? The human body isn't simply a fireplace. Because a calorie, what it is it's essentially you take a piece of food, you burn it, and the heat that's released, that's the caloric value.
Yes.
But your body is not a fireplace. It's a bit more complicated than that. You don't have a fire burning in there and then that heat to release is turned into energy and that efficiency is 100%. That's not really how it works. So this idea of calories needs to be pushed aside. When you consume an artificial sweetener, you send a signal to your body that there's sweetness there. There's an energy-containing molecule there that your body could use. But there isn't anything there. It's just a chemical trick, right? It touched your tongue. It fell into that receptor site.
Insulin gets released.
Insulin now gets released, okay? Insulin being released will promote fat gain, will promote inflammation, will promote all kinds of problems. So you have this artificial sweetener, but you're promoting insulin resistance.
Yes.
You're basically making yourself pre-diabetic slowly over time. And so artificial sweeteners will actually make you fatter faster than having sugar. Yeah. Because there's an extra insult.
That's just from an insulin conversation, not even a chemical toxicity conversation.
That's one way it's going to make things worse for you.
Yeah.
So artificial flavors and coloring, stay away. Finally, poor sleep. We already spoke about it. Sleep is the fundamental healing and recovery and brain processing or emotional processing system in your body. If you don't sleep, everything we talk about falls apart. Everything falls apart without sleep.
You can do everything right, and if you're not sleeping,
it's done. Everything we said is our details.
Waste of time.
Step 3. Now we're at B.
Yeah.
Optimize your brain function.
All right.
I got 5 points here.
Okay.
Regular consumption of organic, mycotoxin-free coffee or tea. And now this is, people talk about coffee or tea and you say, oh, it's not good for you because of the caffeine, this and that. Let me explain how that works.
I think it's a relative conversation.
Well, I was actually talking about this with my brother yesterday, and I might as well go into it. When you produce energy in your body, the energy molecule, the energy currency of the cell, every cell in your body is adenosine triphosphate, ATP. Yeah. When you cleave a phosphate off of that, when you remove one of these phosphate molecules, you have adenosine diphosphate, right? The more time that elapses throughout a day, the more of these adenosine or ADP molecules are floating around, circulating in your body. Your cells have receptors that notice that, hey, adenosine concentration is increasing. That must mean I've been up for longer. The more it concentrates and the more it hits the receptor sites of your cell, the more tired you get. Interesting. That's a signaling pathway, right? What does caffeine do? Caffeine blocks the receptor site for adenosine. And so it doesn't energize you, it makes you numb to the feeling of tiredness. What sleep does is it sweeps away this adenosine. Okay? It's toxic in high amounts. Anything is toxic in high amounts. Even water, even air. So if you have too much adenosine accumulated throughout a day, and you need about 16 hours is the max a human being could go before they start to overaccumulate this stuff and it starts to create brain damage and whatnot. If you have a bad night's sleep and you don't recover properly and you don't sweep it all away, and the next morning you wake up and the first thing you do is have caffeine, you have not only today's adenosine that will be building up in your brain, but yesterday's that was still left over. Interesting. And again, excess adenosine in the brain will become toxic and will create brain damage. Literally, it'll create damage to the DNA structures in your brain. And so that's how caffeine really works. Is it bad for you in and of itself? No, but in those circumstances, it certainly is. Yeah, but that's really an issue with sleep.
There's anything like inherently good or bad. It's always a circumstance with which these things are consumed.
It's a tool.
Yes, every time.
And so that's just one thing to consider, okay? You're having caffeine every day, but are you using it to mask your very poor sleep? Well, you're giving yourself brain damage.
Poor nutrition, lack of sleep, lack of hydration, caffeine's bad. You're sleeping well, training well, micronutrient status is up, you're recovering. Caffeine isn't bad because now it actually is a performance aid.
Yeah, and so you need to know that.
Yes.
And you also need to know that what the half-life of caffeine is. In other words, how long does it take for 50% of that caffeine to be eliminated or detoxed from your body? The half-life is 8 hours.
Well, and that's relative based on the people who have the enzymes to break down caffeine effectively.
Yes,
because not
more or less. Yeah. So that means if I have caffeine first thing in the morning, it'll take me 16 hours approximately to get rid of all the caffeine. So every time you consume caffeine, you're making a commitment to block these receptor sites in your cells for the next 16 hours to some degree. Yeah. If you do not supplement that or make perfect sleep go hand in hand with that caffeine, you will create brain damage over time in your body because of that lack of sleep. It will be a cumulative effect. And this is where people say, I'm addicted to caffeine or coffee because I can't function without it. That's because you have a flood of adenosine.
ADP.
Coming back with a vengeance. Yeah. And it's like, you have toxins. You need to sleep and you can never catch up truly on the sleep. Once the damage is done, it's done.
Lack of sleep is lack of sleep. There's no catching up on sleep. There has to be a consistency in the idea of sleep to keep you upregulated in the functions that you want.
So caffeine in and of itself is not bad. It is simply misused.
Yes, and I think most people's environments are impure or not optimal for the situation of consuming caffeine.
And then I also wrote mycotoxin-free coffee or tea. What are mycotoxins?
Mycotoxins are chemicals, pesticides, fungicides that are often sprayed on coffee specifically. A lot of teas in themselves have sulfites and things like that on it that are very detrimental to our health.
Specifically, mycotoxins, meaning fungal, are derived from funguses living on the coffee bean. A lot of these coffee beans that you'll buy commercially have funguses living on them because of the way they were stored in the warehouse, not temperature regulated, so on and so forth. And you have these little mycotoxins that are left on the bean, and you consume the bean, and these toxins attach to organ structures like the adrenals and make you jittery. Again, it's not the caffeine, it is the toxins attaching to your adrenal associated to this poorly developed bean. So you want to get a mycotoxin-free bean. Number 2.
Which is usually organic. Usually it'd be labeled organic.
Yeah, I mean, I know that the Bulletproof coffee brand tests for that. Biodynamic coffee. And then maybe the third would be some sort of fair trade coffee. That's probably, not too...
cleaner.
Yeah.
Not commercially grown per se.
Look, if it makes you feel bad, then change your brand. Right? Number 2, liberal use of healthy fats. Ghee butter, coconut oil, MCT oil. This is to optimize brain function. Why fats? Isn't your brain made mostly of fat?
Brain is made mostly of fat. Speaking of a personal experience, due to the fungal infection that I had for a period of time, carbohydrates and things of that nature actually gave me a lot of brain fog as, chemical release of fungus feeding on these carbohydrates. So I found that high fat diets, another one you can add in there is avocado or different nuts and seeds, if people can tolerate them, are great options for brain health, to give you the clear, clean energy capacity for your brain to function, I would say.
Yeah, the human body and brain thrives on a high-fat diet. And if you want to talk about it in physiological terms, you're talking about the citric acid cycle or the Krebs cycle in physiology. And per molecule of fat consumed, do not quote me here, you produce, and we talked about ATP before, you produce 136, 34, 32 molecules.
32? I think it's 32.
I don't remember. Of ATP per molecule of fat that's metabolized versus about 32 of a carbohydrate. So,
from a mere energetic, energy production point of view,
the potential is much higher. Yeah. So
although it's harder to break that fat molecule down, it's much more effective when it comes to the byproduct.
It's slower.
In terms of sustainability.
There's more steps. Yeah, it's a slower thing to do. So, and then of course, make sure you're consuming natural fats. Don't consume polyunsaturated fats, vegetable oils. Number 3, nootropic mushroom extracts in powder form. A nootropic is something that potentiates brain function. So if you consume a nootropic, then you think a little faster, remember a little better, act a little smarter. It helps your brain do what it does best. Mushrooms are amazing for this. My go-to is lion's mane mushroom. Powerful nootropic.
If you don't have fungal overgrowth.
I have no fungal overgrowth. Interestingly enough, I actually attributed an old fungal infection to that, but it wasn't the fungus. It was my immune system. I wasn't sleeping properly. I said, I'm taking this supplement and my fungus, I'm getting fungus on my leg. Is it the supplement? No, it's not the supplement. It's my immune system. I was sleep deprived. And once I got a handle on my sleep, it was able to keep that at bay. So, but other than that, nootropic mushrooms, great. High quality, organic, and pure chocolate.
Chocolat.
For brain function.
The cacao.
Antioxidants, polyphenols. Polyphenols are something that are feed the microbiome as well. It's a prebiotic. So that's these are things that I actually put in my coffee every morning, by the way. And finally, a high potency EPA DHA cold water fish oil supplement.
Specifically DHA.
EPA
is really good for body composition, tissue quality. DHA is more attributed to brain function and brain health.
Interesting fact I learned from Dr. Jack Cruz is that the more you are exposed to artificial light, blue light, screens, TVs, white light, the more you're exposed to this, the more your body will use up DHA in your brain, the more you must supplement with it. So if you're someone who sits in front of your computer all day and you're not wearing blue light blocking glasses, you need to be having a lot of DHA in your body. In fact, just given the environment we live in and all the electromagnetic frequencies bombarding us. DHA in high doses on a regular basis, especially during the winter season, is key, absolutely key. You have anything to add to that? Or we're pretty good there?
No, I think we're pretty good there.
Step 4, energize
the mitochondria.
No, wait, I'm ahead of the game here. Am I?
No, you're
I think I actually did a little, no, yeah, right, really. We're that far ahead?
Yep.
Pollutants, artificial flavors. Oh, we're done. We're done. Okay. Energize the mitochondria. Last one. Cold thermogenesis. Would you explain what that is?
I just want to touch on mitochondria real brief.
Go ahead.
So mitochondria, we talked about oxidizing fat for energy and the potential that it gives us in terms of ATP, right? Mitochondria is what takes that fat molecule and creates that ATP in the 134 to 36 range, giving us that energy potential. And we have to remember that this is a bacterial cell. Mitochondria is bacteria within our eukaryote, which is a human cell. And so when we're doing the research on bacteria, we're looking at how these different lifestyle affects actually your mitochondrial health, which gives you more energy potential. Now, the first one we talked about is cold thermogenesis. So I don't know if you guys have heard of Wim Hof breathing, which is outside, different ice bath methodologies. The same can be said for heat therapy, such as infrared saunas, and really giving the mitochondria those stressors in terms of cold temperatures and hot temperatures, and able to work in these different thermogenic environments.
Yeah, so my understanding of how, and just to add to what you were saying, you know, GMBM, gut microbiome, brain mitochondria. Mitochondria is the last step in the long chain of events. Everything comes down to, are you producing energy in your mitochondria? The reason we want a healthy gut is because we want to produce energy. The reason we want a healthy microbiome is because we want to produce energy. The reason we want a healthy brain is because we want to produce and use energy. All of this happens fundamentally at the level of the mitochondria. And so this is where the circle, the vicious circle of poor health or the circle of good health, that's how it works. So cold thermogenesis is one way to do that. Go outside, get cold. What happens?
Go for a walk in spring or fall, even winter.
Yeah, and dress lightly. What happens? Your body senses the cold. It is forced to respond in order to regulate its temperature. How does it produce this extra heat? It amps up energy production, kind of like putting wood in a fire. So your mitochondria will get exercised. They'll more efficiently use the elements required to make that energy. And just like a fire, you need oxygen, you need an accelerant, you need fuel. And so you put yourself in this cold environment, your body will use up energy faster. This has a cleaning effect in terms of all the stuff that's floating on in your body.
Yeah, and most of us live in thermoregulated environments where we're never actually going into hot or cold, and we're sitting around, say, 15 to 25 all the time, all year round.
Going back to the fire analogy, if you have a fire that's not burning at an optimal temperature, you create too many byproducts of that fire. You create a lot of excessive fumes or whatever it may be. If you get the fire hotter, then it burns cleaner.
Cleaner burn.
You know, if it's not hot enough, it doesn't burn as cleanly. If you're not producing energy at a maximum efficiency, then you have metabolic byproducts or waste products floating around in your body that have to be detoxed. They become toxins, and they feed pathogens. So that's what cold thermogenesis is. In a similar vein, infrared light therapy promotes circulation more than anything, right? It keeps things moving. Imagine adding or fanning a flame with air. Infrared light therapy will promote the circulation of these products necessary for energy metabolism in your body. So that's why infrared light therapy is so important. You talked about infrared sauna. What would you say the difference is there? That's
infrared sauna. It goes back to like the cold thermogenesis in terms of heat, right? The thermodynamic differential of hot and cold. And infrared saunas differ from regular saunas in the terms of it's not just heat externally, but infrared actually penetrates the skin and gets heat inside the system to push things out. So when it comes from a toxicity potential in sweat analysis, they find much more toxins in the byproducts of infrared saunas versus just regular saunas.
Great. Finally, Tuma breathing. To put it very simply, this goes back to the Wim Hof method. Tuma breathing is this form of breathing, also called fire breath, where you breathe for a cycle of breaths, you'd hyperventilate, and then you'd hold your breath for as long as possible. In holding your breath for as long as possible, you create this situation for your cells where they say, I am starving of oxygen.
So are you outgassing oxygen in terms of like CO2
you let it out,
potential?
You let it all out, and then you hold for as long as possible, up until the point where you feel the need to gasp reflexively. That is an optimal stressor for your body to say, oh my gosh, I am out of air. Next time I ingest another breath of air, I'm going to use that oxygen much more efficiently because I am not certain whether or not I'll have air again.
Another breath, yeah.
And so you're cycling between breathing in, filling, letting it all out, holding until you gasp, and your mitochondria say, hey, you know what? Every time I'm going to have oxygen here, I'm going to burn every last bit because
I don't know
we're in a weird situation here. And
this is more of like a meditative breathing method?
It puts you in a meditative state. You have to be in a meditative state to do it effectively. You'll produce a lot of heat doing it. That's your mitochondria working really hard.
You probably get a little high too.
I've never gotten high off of it. I certainly felt at peace doing it. It is a form of meditation, and I've sweat. I've had sweat dripping down me in the middle of winter. I only did it once. I mean, it's going to be my third year this year. Yeah. But
so how often would you do something like that?
And I do it all winter. It's one of my ways to survive the winter.
All winter?
As often, as long as it's not too cold, right?
So you're talking about outside.
I'm going outside. I'm sitting on a cloth.
Yes.
My skin is snow. Yeah, and I'm at least shirtless. Yeah. And I'm there for 20 minutes, sometimes 30, and I'm doing it. And I become cold adapted, and I don't get a cold. I haven't. I've been sick once in 10 years, so I don't get colds. Nothing. Microbiome health. Responsive nervous system. Shift in the temperature, sleep, food.
Okay, awesome.
It all comes together. That's pretty much it. So, thanks for your time.
Thank you.
All right, great.